Even though when we were doing it, we said to all the people there, please don't film it and put it on YouTube because you can spoil it.
Yeah,
A few people did actually, but
I thought it was lovely. It was quite sort of emotional, wasn't it?
well,
Yeah.
yeah, it was. This is.
I've never seen you that emotional.
I know, and I was slightly embarrassed, I'll be honest, to think, oh no, you can see me getting all choked up about a toy train. But it is partly because I suppose at heart I am slightly sentimental, and I try to keep that hidden. And I'm very sentimental about my Flying Scotsman because I've had it for a long time, and it's a little totem of who I am. But also, it wasn't just about the train, it was because the first time we did it, it failed, and it's such bloody hard work making that thing function. And all those people, had to lay the track and invent the machines, and it's a mammoth task.
It was extraordinary. I mean, did you immediately after the first failure think we've got to do this again, or did you think it's just to mount it again is just too much?
I thought we should do this again, but whenever I mentioned it to the people involved, they always said, "You must be bloody joking. It's just too difficult, and it's too stressful." Sorry, I ran up the stairs thinking that was my daily exercise.
I like your new regime. You cigarette and run up the stairs.
Yeah. So no, but then I mentioned it to the BBC because, of course, we can't do it unless they commission it. And I said, look, can we do one more? Can we have another go at the trains? And I thought they'd say, no, you've done that. Tough luck. But they said, yeah, go on then. So we did. Yeah. And then we thought we'd better make it a bit more difficult with the race. And the weird thing about toys is I first came up with that idea. Well, the idea for the Lego house I've had since I was about 6 years old. But the idea of doing it on the telly as a series came about 6 years ago. And I started making, I made 2 short one-offs about toys. And really they were intended to be a sort of popular science program. It was a program about engineering, really, and physics, but using toys because it was amusing. And the history of toys is fascinating. What it tells us about society and how we thought it would turn out and all that sort of thing. But as we started making them, we realised that actually there's this sort of groundswell of affection for the great toys like Lego and Meccano and Airfix, and that people loved it and loved getting involved. So actually the programmes ended up being partly about history and engineering, but also partly about community spirit and love and peace.
Yeah, I thought it had a big society feel to it.
Yes, it did a bit.
Did that surprise you that it took up like that?
It did, because there was always a point. I mean, I am genuinely fascinated by model trains. I think they're wonderful things. I like them because they're pieces of engineering, and they're a bit like clocks and watches. They work, and you can fiddle with them. And if I love it if I go around to one of my mates' house and he says, "Oh, our kid's train set isn't working." I think, "Leave that to me. You do the cooking. I'll mend the train set." Because they're just lovely
great
things.
fun on Christmas morning.
Oh yeah, I love all that stuff. Yeah, but it is that. But I realise that I am a bit sort of too attached to them. I'm a bit sort of possibly autistic. I don't really understand autism, and most people don't. It's one of those words that gets bandied around rather glibly.
But it's beyond sort of nerdism, if you like, isn't it?
It is a bit, yes.
It's beyond that.
It is a sort of love, actually. I love them. People give them to me for presents now because I've made programmes about them. And I love it. I think, it's a model train, and it's a beautiful thing. But then, I kept having moments where I would wake up in the morning and think, oh God, have I done the wrong thing here? I'm making this really deadly serious program about running toy trains over a vast distance, and I'm exposing a rather fragile part of my personality, which is this weakness I have for a really slightly sentimental toy, and it's just going to be ridiculed. But in fact it isn't. People like it.
I
They
think
it's
because if you
great
have
fun.
genuine affection, that does come through. People like that, don't they?
Yeah.
I don't know whether you've got a partner or a girlfriend. I mean, did she talk to you about it?
Yes.
I mean, it's the sort of thing that, girlfriends, wives would think, oh, for God's sake,
No,
you grow up a bit, or...
Well, I've lived with the same... We're not actually married, but we've been living together for 10 years, the best part of. And she, she thinks it's actually sort of quite nice that I like toy trains, and that I like things like watches and clocks, and I fiddle with them, and I get a bit sort of quiet and curled up in a ball. She thinks that's perfectly okay. It's a hobby. It's harmless. It's probably quite healthy, even. But even she had some days. She says, "Oh, It's an interesting idea for a programme, and I can see why it's an interesting challenge, but you'll forever now be thought of as that nerdy bloke who's obsessed with toys, but he's 48 years old, and maybe I am, but it's too late. I've done it now.
And it must be quite nerve-wracking to sort of mount that, because there's lots of local people involved. There were the German guys as well.
Yes,
I mean,
and
did you ever think this is going to go horribly wrong at some point?
Well, I must admit, the main problems with the first run, as we try to explain quite succinctly in the programme, it was things like the power supply, the problems of putting the track together, the weather, the logistics of all those people who are involved. Now, we can't do anything about the weather, and that's always a risk. But we worked very hard. I came up with that leapfrog battery system, which I was convinced was the way to work, because that was based on aspects of real railway practice.
Oh, really? That was great.
Yeah, we didn't have time to put that in the explanation of the programme, because it's a bit complicated. But that was all very well thought through. And then we had the Track-O-Matic machine, which worked. It didn't quite work well enough, but it was pretty good, and it made a difference. And we laid the track the night before rather than the day before, or trying to do it on the morning, and we had security to look after it.
How many hours did it take to lay the track then?
Well, we started at 9 o'clock in the morning the day before, and we finished at 7 a.m. on the day of the race.
God, so did you get proper permission from anybody to the councils and stuff? They must have...
Yeah, tons.
They must
They're very helpful, actually, because...
Were they?
Well, everybody down there is dead into the idea, because it didn't work last time, and they've sort of embraced it as a sort of almost a point of honour or principle that this little toy railway should work, especially as it's going along the route of a railway that was there for real, and that they sort of rather lament. But there was a point, and it was on the evening before the race. We still hadn't got all the track down. We had some trouble with one of the Track-O-Matics was going wrong, and we were trying to lay some of it by hand, and that wasn't working very well, and people were getting too tired, and we didn't have enough torches. And I remember sitting in my room, and I hurt my back as well, because I'd had a small accident, and I had to have a physiotherapist come round and sort of put me back into shape. And I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and I thought, oh no, we're going to fuck it up again, then we're going to have to keep coming back every year. But then we all pulled through, and it worked. And all the time you're thinking, hang on a minute, this is just toy trains, it's silly. But it isn't. It becomes vitally important to everybody involved.
I mean, you mentioned beaching it, and I thought that was interesting, because there must be a lot of... people must harbour the thought this railway disappeared. At that point, I take it, to go on the cuts, did it?
Yes, it was named in the 1963 report. I think the passenger bits started closing down in 1965. Bits of the line, like the bit into Fremington, stayed open until the 80s, but only as a freight route, bringing clay from further south up to the quayside. But then when that stopped, it was all taken up and it all became a cycle track.
And you got Oz on board again.
Yes.
He was very good on the Scotsman. He read up on his background. Does he know a lot about it?
Oh no, he knows loads about the history of railways. He loves it, yeah. He doesn't know very much about model trains. He's not actually particularly into the technology of trains. Whereas because of my sort of general interest in machinery, I know how steam locomotives and diesel-electric locomotives work, and roughly how they're operated and what all the bits do. But Oz has this massive knowledge of especially railway routes, where all the lines went pre-beaching, and he even knows bits of old timetables. He knows when the Atlantic Coast Express ran and where it split up, and he knows quite a lot about, he can identify locomotives and say, oh, this ran on that line, this was in that region. He's great at that. He loves it.
So were you two separated at birth or something? Sometimes you're very alike in a lot of ways.
In some ways, yes, but then the other side of it is that Oz is completely... He's entirely intellectual, Oz. He doesn't have a practical side. Apart from, he can cook. I mean, I've eaten stuff that he's cooked, and it's pretty good. And we share an enthusiasm for things in tins and packets and things that are past their sell-by date, because it's an experiment. But the idea that, whenever we did things like the wine adventure...
The E. coli.
Yes, exactly. It's poking diseases with a pointy stick and then running away. But he's when the wheel fell off our caravan, or we got a puncture on the car, I think Oz will sit and have a glass of wine whilst I mend it. That's and we're both very happy with that. That's accepted practice.
Sorry, yeah, that's very good. So, what about when children watch it? Do you want them to come away thinking, I should be, using these toys? I mean, I should get off my PlayStation, etc.
Well, it's not meant to be evangelical, and I'm not. Despite what people think, I'm not anti-computer games. I think some of them are fantastic, and if there'd been things like Microsoft Flight Simulator when I was a kid, I would have grown up disturbed, I think, because you'd never have got me off it. So I think they're good, and I'm not lying awake at night thinking, oh God, kids aren't playing with train sets, something must be done. I don't actually think that, but I think if people try these things, they will find them quite, not just rewarding, but also constructional toys, actual three-dimensional ones rather than virtual computer ones. They are, I believe, therapeutic. And that isn't just me, because we know that things like Lego is used as a therapy. And, so I think Meccano probably has been as well, but Lego definitely is with people who have had things like, massive trauma or brain injuries or strokes and things, so they're learning to reuse hands. And plasticine was used 100 years ago to help people exercise damaged limbs. Rather than the way you get those stress balls and those exercises, they used to give people big lumps of plasticine to squeeze and then reshape and squeeze to help, cure injuries to wrists and fingers and things.
So it's not a sort of Jamie Oliver style approach to it?
No, I'm not trying to change the world.
No.
No, there aren't going to be people feeding computer games through the railings of the school because I'm making them play with the train set. No, it's not that at all. It's something I like, and I can't believe that other people don't.
But do you think for children now, I've got 3 kids, that the time has sort of passed. I mean, we've got those things there, but they just seem to go past them all and don't think they'll be interesting enough. Or do you?
You see, I haven't got any kids, but I've got, I've had several nephews and things, nephews and nieces.
Is it the adults' fault? Are we not sort of introducing them in the right way, or is it,
Well, I know a lot of blokes who have produced a son, and then whilst the infant is still 3 weeks old, gone out to buy a scale electric or a train set. And it's obviously for himself, because the child can't appreciate it for another 7 years or something. So, do kids... I mean, I know some people whose kids like things like train sets, and I know people my age, in fact, who completely passed that sort of thing. I think Richard Hammond never had a train set. I think I'm right in saying that. Yeah.
Well, that shows, doesn't it?
Jeremy claims he did, but I'm not sure I actually believe him. He doesn't seem like the sort of bloke who would have had a train set. I mean, surely it would just be broken in 5 minutes. Or blown up.
I think you're right. So,
I think he's just jealous of mine, that's what it is, isn't it?
What did they make of this, the Hammond and Clarkson of it? I mean, because it's...
I think they're quite... I mean, even Jeremy said once that he thought... I don't think he has any interest in the history of toys, and he quite famously has no interest in the way things work or the physics or engineering behind them. But he did acknowledge once that he thought that the Toy Stories idea was a good one and quite worthwhile, which is fairly high praise coming from him, because normally you would just make a point of saying it was either gay or it's because I've got OCD, or whatever Richard Hammond did was because he lives in a yogurt commercial, or
And do you think there's any more scope in this? Do you think there are other toys that you want to do?
Well, I think we've had a discussion about this quite recently. We're sort of knocking around with some ideas. We've sort of done the really enduring iconic toys, but there are some that we haven't tackled that we could do if we could find an interesting way of treating them. For example, Action Man was something I wasn't into, but it's quite interesting because you have Action Man and you also have Cindy and Barbie. And this massive culture that surrounds those things, of accessories and uniforms and so on. And we've toyed around with the ideas of some massive project we could do with thousands of action men and Barbies. And we've also Subbuteo is something we haven't tackled. My brother was very into that. And then there are other areas like model boats, radio-controlled cars, which is something that's actually burgeoned in recent years. Because when I was a kid, that stuff was so hideously expensive.
It's very sophisticated nowadays.
Yeah, and it's almost disposable. It's so cheap. But we've sort of done the really big ones, I mean, Lego has an unassailable position as the king of both constructional toys and sort of philosophical plastic. If it is this unerring mathematical models, and somewhere in there is the secret of the universe. We haven't found it yet, but it will be revealed in Lego, I believe. So I would like to do, and I have great difficulty convincing people of this, especially the production people who work with me, because they all have nervous breakdowns about the trains. But I think if people like this new programme, which I hope they do, there is scope for doing silly things with toy trains. There's something about it, because it's absurd, because I've started to believe it really matters and that it's important, and other people will quite happily be drawn into this and devote all their energies and all their thought power and all their sort of intellectual effort into making a toy train run from Barnstaple to Bideford, even though it is of no consequence whatsoever. Whichever way you look at it, it just doesn't matter, and yet it does. So I'd quite like to send one through the Channel Tunnel, because there's never been a model railway linking two countries.
Great idea.
And we could send, peace gifts to and from France, pork pie, cheese, samples of our national drinks, all sorts of things. It would be great.
It's great. And is it also doing something to sort of resurrect the poor old train spotter reputation as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I see. I was never a train spotter. People a bit older than me say that back in the 1950s and early 60s, train spotting was just something that boys did. You collected the numbers of trains, rather than the way these days a lot of boys, collect cards with cars on. The Top Gear, Top Trumps thing we do. They're massively popular.
Yeah, we love that.
But I was never really a train spotter. I was only ever interested in the sort of technical side of trains and the sort of artistry of it. I like the artistry of machinery as well. I like old motorcycles. I think they are genuinely beautiful things, and if I had the space and the money, I would quite happily have a museum, and people could come and look at it, but I would just have ones that I thought were lovely and line them up and polish them. It's great.
I was down at Bewley on the weekend, the end of last week actually. They were talking about you. I think
were they?
Yeah, well, in a nice way.
Oh, that's all right.
In a nice way. They were talking about, I think you'd rung up, I don't know whether the motorcycle expert guy that you'd rung about your Honda, which wasn't.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was that for the Vietnam?
No, that was one of my own Hondas.
Oh, was it?
Yes. It's interesting. He came up with a reason why it wasn't starting properly, and I have to say he was spot on. Because they can mend the whole history of motoring down there. That's the great thing about them.
I thought it was a brilliant workshop.
Yeah, absolutely fabulous. But I've got another Honda, a 250, which is going to become the Man Lab Honda. It's known as the unmendable motorcycle. So I can never quite get it to run properly, but we'll make that a TV project.
So Man Lab's coming back, yeah?
Yes, we've started filming it. It'll be back in the autumn. We don't know exactly when. October, November, we think, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometime around
I
then.
love all this blokes TV. I mean, it's fantastic. And it's not a mission of yours, is it?
No, not particularly. Well,
I mean,
there was a slight mission.
Programs for men that women watch, or we don't want to get.
I hope women would watch it as well. I hope women will watch the trains race. The Man Lab thing is, I just got bored of the idea that if you're a bloke, you have to present yourself as a bit of a lovable half-wit. I think everybody's getting a bit bored with that. We all secretly want to make things and mend things and, do something useful. I think women are bored of us being hopeless as well. It's a bit of a tired joke. It's been going on for about 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I agree. And Top Gear's coming back very soon.
Top Gear is back in 2 weeks on Sunday, is that right? Yes.
So what can we expect from the new series?
I try not to give too much away because we have managed to keep it reasonably secret this time. But I gave a broad outline of the contents to somebody earlier on, and she said, "Oh, it sounds like you've made the what was it?" She said the ecologically aware series, but no, we haven't. We have got some electric cars in it.
Have you?
That Jeremy and I are testing. We've also got some ideas about public transport that we're testing out, and we're driving, for example, a trio of hot hatchbacks in the best sort of 1980s tradition. Not 1980s cars, they're new ones, but we're sort of making the case that something I've believed for a long time, which is a small car with a reasonable amount of power that is good fun to drive at a sort of visceral level, at a sensational level, is actually probably the best car there is for someone who likes driving. It isn't actually Ferraris and Lamborghinis. It's sort of arsey little French
It's
Clios.
It's interesting. And yet the driving experience in those cars has just suffered, hasn't it, over the last 10, 15
in what, in Ferraris?
No, in terms of those sort of hatches.
Yeah.
You can't. All right, that's it. So which cars are you doing in that?
I've got a Clio Cup, which is the 200 horsepower one. Hammond's got the Abarth Fiat 500, and Jeremy's got the Citroën DS3 Racing, which is a sort of rather grandiosely named hot version of the slightly old people's mid-sized Citroën. But we genuinely love them. I mean, we looked forward to doing this trip for months. We were going to go to Italy and drive around, and then we go to Monaco to drive around the Grand Prix circuit, and it's fab. Belting around in these little cars. I love it.
And I heard you were filming out in Australia for a special. Is that? Can we say?
No.
That's my son. He'd read that somewhere.
That must have been Top Gear Live, possibly.
Right.
Yeah, we were in Australia at the beginning of the year doing the live
really?
show. But I haven't filmed anything in Australia,
Mm.
unless I
Made
didn't
that up
notice.
and then just deliberately misled me for the hell of it.
We're releasing the DVD of the train. The trains race is coming out as a DVD as well, with a bit of extra stuff on it, because we couldn't get it all in the film. So there's about 15 or 20 minutes extra, and that's being sold in Australia as well. But that's about it for Australia for the moment.
Is it?
But the idea of a model railway that followed the Nullarbor Road,
Yeah, that's what that'll be after the tunnel then. Do you
that
think?
would have to be after the tunnel. And I see. I've also got this idea, and they just despair at the production office when I mention it. But I think if we organised groups of society well enough, and sort of expanded on my battery leapfrogging idea, so that it was actually track leapfrogging, very, very carefully orchestrated, we could run a toy train from Land's End to John O'Groats continuously, with each town and village and place being involved, laying the track for the next day's running. And it would take a bloody long time, but
It's another fantastic idea. With a small budget attached to it.
yeah, it would. Yeah. Well, a lot of it is done through goodwill.
Mm.
I mean, we've still got the use. We only borrowed the track. We didn't buy it, and it was all rescue. 99% of it is reused. But that probably still exists somewhere in a warehouse. I suppose if we could keep borrowing that 10 miles of track,
And then
10 miles takes a day for the train to run. We could start, Wallace and
then
Gromit
overnight,
style.
then
Yeah.
get into absolutely.
And the train could keep going, and then we could probably do Berlin to Moscow, or the Trans-Siberia. Eventually, the whole world could become engrossed in this, making a toy train go.
But isn't the great thing about the toy trains and model railways that you can make them run as you like in a sense, whereas our own train system, when I use it, is awful. I mean, do you use trains?
I do occasionally. I like the great paradox of trains is that the place where everybody thinks they will save the world is in cities, and everybody talks about light railways and trams and so on. But the place where they really work is going from London to Edinburgh, I went to York a bit back, and it was bloody fabulous, so fast. But you need to get to the station, and that's why you need a car or a motorcycle. I often, when I have to, I avoid it. But if I'm sitting on a long motorway journey in the car, I always think this is ridiculous. Now I should be on a train, because driving a car on a motorway, it sort of involves you just enough to prevent you reading the paper or doing a crossword or something. But it doesn't involve you enough to be involving. It's like ironing. In fact, it's slightly worse than ironing. Ironing can be quite satisfying. So at that point you think, well, I should be on a train, and trains are much faster. London to York is 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
If you go in the car, it feels like going to the bloody moon.
But as a
miles
mass
away.
transport system, it just seems to have failed now, isn't it? I mean, in pricing, everything about it. Do you not think?
I think my experience of it is that it's been made because of the drive for privatisation and deregulation and freedom of this, that, and the other. That probably all makes great sense to the business world, and it may well make it competitive and all the rest of it. But as the user, to somebody who simply wants to meet this, what is now seems like a basic requirement to get around the country, I like to go to the station and get on the train. I don't want to have to think, do I get the Virgin train or the East Coast this or the Great Western this, and is this ticket valid on this train at this time, unless I get off at Edinburgh, but not if I'm sitting next to a bloke who's from Yorkshire, sort of thing. It's just bloody, it's far too complicated. They're unloading, like government does this as well. They unload the burden of admin onto the people. Whereas I think that's what they're there to do, to keep us free, to do
Sounds like an
something
argument
useful.
for British Rail to me.
Yes, it does. I mean, I don't know that much about the history of railways, but when I've sort of delved into it, I sometimes get the feeling that the train sort of came too soon and wasn't quite given a chance. Because it's been around since 1829, I suppose, the Liverpool to Manchester. But they really blossomed. I suppose it started just before the First World War, but in the 1920s, that was the sort of glory days of Mallard and the Coronation streamliners and all that stuff. And then, by the time I was a teenager, they were going a bit shabby, and all the branch lines had already gone. And in the 60s, people held the railways in a certain amount of disdain because they all wanted a Ford Cortina or whatever. And now we're at the point where they've almost been allowed to slide too far, and we can't quite get them back. But they appeal to me.
Yeah, and what was the conclusion of the public transport thing you did for Top Gear? Is that
We haven't done it yet.
Oh right, so that is it a test of forms of public transport?
No. I don't want to give too much away, but we're sort of based around the idea of the public carriage. We think we may be able to drag the idea up to date.
Really?
But the railways thing is, I can see why people become railway enthusiasts, and the people who I've met who are real railway enthusiasts, and this includes Oz to a certain extent. Oz is quite a well-balanced man ultimately, because he also knows about wine and literature and used to sing in the choir and so on. But those people who are really sort of obsessively into railways are always more obsessive than people who are into other things. They become so totally immersed in it. And when I did things like went down to the Tarka Trail to do the first version of the trains thing in the original series, we started getting out the archive of shots of when the goods trains ran along there and when sort of small tank engines went along with bits of the Atlantic Coast Express as it splits up. I know that in the 50s and 60s the world was filthy. Steam engines made an appalling mess. They're terribly inefficient. They're difficult to maintain. They made life absolutely medieval for the crews who had to fire and drive them. But nevertheless, railways are strangely magical. A part of it, I think, is because when you drive a car or ride a motorcycle or even fly a light aircraft, especially the light aircraft, you're sort of presented with a choice or a series of choices. You can decide as you go along what happens. I mean, you've got to drive a car on the road, unless you're in a Land Rover and you're very lucky, but you've got to drive on the road. But there are lots of roads, and you can order them the way you want, to go the way you want. When you get on a train, you submit to something that has been preordained with two bits of metal, and they go, and you give yourself over to it, and you can do nothing about it. And that sort of makes it magical. It makes it very exciting. And there's something indomitable about trains. When you watch them, they're coming, you think they're coming, and they are coming, and you can't do anything about it, and it will go exactly that way. It will only deviate by actually a few millimetres.
I think your love of trains means you'll have to leave Top Gear.
Yes, maybe
and start the equivalent train series.
Maybe I like trains more than I realised.
Do you like trains more than cars now?
No, I don't think so. I mainly like toy trains. I like fiddling with them, and I like mending them. And if somebody says to me, "Oh yeah, I've got some trains in the attic," which a lot of people my age do say, and they've probably been up there for 30, 35 years, they get them out and give them to me, and I go home. And then if I get a very quiet moment when Sarah's out and I don't have any work to do, I'll go up in the loft and take one of them out and make it work again. And when it sets off, and the dreams and the hopes of whatever bloke it was who gave it to me are revived as it starts moving, I think that was worth doing. I get a massive buzz out of it.
That's great. Hornby must love you.
I don't know. They might do. I give them back again after, so there's your train, it works. You can put it back in the loft for another half century, and then someone else can mend it.
Just quickly on Top Gear, I mean, it seems to me that every series starts and there's a little bit of controversy here there. I mean, it's sometimes you, sometimes Jeremy. Do you think it's in the DNA of the series that it's always just touching on these sort of things, or is it just by pure accident this happens?
I think it's largely accidents. To be honest, we don't sit there thinking, "Hey, how can we wind up the Guardian this week?" sort of thing, or at least I don't. It's the result of sort of boyish over enthusiasm and possibly a little bit of bravado and even immaturity. We could probably do with the televisual equivalent of, what would it be, a nanny or matron or something.
To sort you out for an episode.
Yeah, to kind of beat us occasionally, probably. To just sort of say, you're going too far and it will end in tears, all those things your mother used to say.
But do you ever, as the three of you say, sit down and say, look, perhaps we were wrong to say whatever we did, or, does it not, I mean, it doesn't trouble me, but...
no, I don't think we ever confront it quite that bluntly.
You don't censor yourself that, those sort of episodes haven't made you censor yourself. Look, we're not going to talk about foreigners in a particular way. We're not,
no, I don't think we did that.
No.
If you pressed us, we might acknowledge that occasionally we've simply not done it very well, because we're not professional comics or anything. We're just three old twats.
But comedy is a big part of it, though, isn't it? Well, it is,
but it's sort of inadvertent comedy. We're not comedy writers or anything.
No, indeed, no. But I mean, would you rather that it didn't attract that sort of attention? And people, because it strikes me that the media go looking for it in every series, and they do. They train their eyes on their ears on each episode to find out who's overstepped the mark this time.
No, it's definitely a bit fashionable to look for who has Top Gear offended this week, and actually a lot of it I don't think we've been offensive. There was something we did once. It was actually one of Jeremy's. I think it was probably when he was talking about burqas, and that people underneath their burqas wore agent provocateur underwear or something, and people were saying this is offensive and it's a racial or religious stereotype or something. But I don't think it was offensive. And in fact, I don't think it's really surprising, because nobody's suggesting really that Islamic dress codes are meant to de-sex women, are they? As far as I know, why? I don't think it's
to do with the attraction of.
Yes, and keeping it secret. But there's no reason to assume they wouldn't be have just as nice underwear as anybody else underneath. So.
But of course, that's one of the areas that people are sensitive about. So is it? I suppose inevitably you'd be reluctant to say these sort of things in the future. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we will. We're not censoring ourselves, are we? No, we're not. I don't think we've got that much to be ashamed of. We're only a bit naughty occasionally. We're not. There are people out there saying much worse things than us, and we're not inciting racial hatred or religious intolerance or anything like that. We're talking about cars. It doesn't really matter.
No, absolutely.
It probably matters not much more than the toy trains, really.
Yeah, and do you think the show has got even more longevity? I mean, because you do loads of other things. Richard does.
Yeah.
Not so many, but.
Jeremy's just finished a book. People were asking me about this today because I was slightly misinterpreted about what I'd said in the Telegraph this morning. It will. I mean, we're making another series now. We're not planning to scrap it any moment. But eventually, what I was actually saying was, eventually we will have to give way to someone else, because I'm sure Top Gear, as an idea, a programme very, very broadly about cars and motoring, can survive longer than the current batch of presenters. It's been reinvented several times in the past. It can be reinvented again, and will need to be, like everything else. A younger group of people will come in and they'll say, actually, that was getting a bit square. I just hope that we have the intelligence and the maturity to stop before we are stopped by our own boredom. I don't mean boredom with ourselves, with people being bored with us.
But you're all still as enthusiastic about coming up with all the ideas and the show itself,
Yeah, we haven't run out of ideas
yet. It doesn't sound like anytime soon to me.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Unless there's something I don't know. But
I suppose the big thing with the BBC is budgets.
I may have been fired and they just haven't told me yet. It's only happened this morning.
How do you feel? No,
gives me more time to make toy train programmes, I suppose.
I mean, it's budgets are a big thing at the BBC at the moment, aren't they? I mean, there was a play made of that at the end of the last series. I mean, do you feel it's possible to keep making the show in the way you want to with cuts that are going on? Well,
our budget has already been reduced once, hasn't it? About a year, or was it 2 years ago? It was cut a bit. The truth is Top Gear is big and generates quite a bit of money. So we haven't got the biggest budget in the world, but it's a reasonable one, and we can afford to do quite elaborate things. We have the luxury of several crews filming us, which allows us to make a more sharply edited, more genuine programme. If for some reason the budget had to be massively cut, we could still find a way of making it. We don't waste money on fripperies. I mean, if you saw our green room and our facilities at our studio and things, you'd be utterly appalled. I mean, they are.
Well, I saw the
truly
film that they made at the
shabby.
Motor Museum about the production rooms. I don't know
Yeah.
whether that's so.
That's
That's
the same
those
thing,
real
yeah.
rooms. That was very funny.
And that's the nice bit.
so
It's
that
actually-
really is right. That's
Yeah,
a
it's
surmountable. Yeah.
it's condemned really. But
Yeah.
so, you know, we don't waste money on things like that. We don't have elaborate riders, and we don't want swan on toast or anything like that. The money is spent making the programme. But we could still make it if the budget was reduced, because we used to make it with a smaller budget, and we could, you know, we still made a successful programme. So
And what's it like when you travel? Because the show is just absolutely huge now around the world. I mean, are people coming up to you all around the place? There must be.
yeah, pretty much everywhere now, to be honest.
How do you find that?
Well, I've always said I don't mind at all. It's quite flattering, but I find it, if anything, I find it slightly embarrassing, because obviously it wasn't meant to happen. I wasn't meant to be famous all over the world. It's ridiculous. So I'm a bit sort of bashful about it, but it doesn't. I don't get stroppy about it or anything. Most people are perfectly pleasant.
And what do you make of the? I mean, there are a couple of other foreign versions, aren't there now?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn that off. There are some. Are you thinking about the Australian and the American one?
Which didn't make the cut, and
No, I like them actually, and I like all the blokes who do them. I've met them quite a lot now.
oh right.
The thing I always thought must be very difficult for them, and I wouldn't want to do it, is you're adopting a format from someone else, which happens quite a lot in television. Obviously, I mean things like Blind Date was a format that we got from Belgium or somewhere.
Yeah.
It was or Holland, I can't remember. Or no, France in fact. So they do that, and that's quite difficult, and they're following it quite closely. You know, they have a stig and they have a guest and they do their tests and they have a track and all the rest of it. And that wouldn't be so bad. And once they'd got hold of it and they'd done it for a bit, they'd gradually turn it into their own, and the American one would become a bit more American and the Australian one would become more Australian, which is undoubtedly different. But the difficulty for them is that the original is already popular all over the world anyway.
Yeah.
So people in Australia are already watching our one, and we've been refining it for 8 or 9 years and spending more money on it, and you know, trimming away at the in jokes and the fixed idea. And it's a very sophisticated, very complicated cultural phenomenon now, Top Gear. And then you're sitting there having to almost take on the role of one of us three and make your own version. It's a bit of a hiding to nothing. I wouldn't do it.
And are you all still getting on well? I mean, do you all still, you know, I mean, I sort of sometimes get the feeling when I watch the three of you that that's exactly what you're like in a way.
Me, Hammond and Clarkson?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we went outside. We went out last night for a beer together, which actually we don't do very often, because we see quite a lot of each other whilst we're filming, which often involves staying away.
Yeah.
And we've all got other things to do. But it was actually quite nice to go out with them and just have a beer without the requirement to...
What do you talk about?
Oh, just complete bollocks. Nothing really. But I mean, but the chemistry of... People always ask about the chemistry of Top Gear, how does it work? I don't know. I mean, Jeremy and I famously admit that we don't really like each other. Not really, you know, we wind each other up, but that's sort of quite healthy in a way. I've got mates who wind me up as well, but they're still my mates. That's okay. It's just that Jeremy, sadly, is, you know, a complete arse. But there you go. We just have to like him for it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure.
And
So
no
you would lend
more-
your support to the more programs about doing silly things with toy trains.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I love the tunnel stuff. I think that's.
I want to do the tunnel.
Because there's another tunnel there anyway, isn't there?
Well, there's the service tunnel down the middle.
You could
Yeah,
do the service
they've
tunnel.
said we can use it.
Have they really?
Yeah, but the problem is, I mean, don't necessarily put this in your article, but the difficulty is when I talk to the production company and the director I work with about it, they say it's an interesting challenge, but televisually it will all look the same, which it will. The service tunnel looks like that wall all the way through. To which I say, yes, but we could make it exciting if we made it a programme more about the logistics of running the railway. See, what I'd really love to do, there's two things I'd love to be able to do, and I'm going to experiment with the second of these. The first is, which was the original idea, is that people who have got Hornby railway track in their loft that they're not using, send it to us, and we mark it with some, with some digitised identity paint, and somebody's job is to keep a log of where it all comes from, and it all gets plugged together, so your bit of track that you had in the loft becomes part of this massive railway. And then we have an internet link up, so you can watch live when the train goes on your bit of track. That's the first thing. But the other thing I'd love to be able to do is completely automate the 2 tracks running through the service tunnel of the Channel Tunnel. So you'd set your trains off from Folkestone, get on the ferry and go to Calais and wait for it to come out. Yeah. I mean, that would be pretty bloody difficult, but if it worked, that would be magnificent. Because you wouldn't know if it was coming.
No, you wouldn't. That's great. Well, yeah. We at the Sunday Express are backing that idea, even though we, of course, have our own